Have you ever seen a poll and wondered, how can they possibly know what an entire country is thinking? Or how can researchers figure out the habits of millions of people? Well, it all comes down to the science of sampling, and we're about to break down exactly how it all works.
The writer H.G. Wells said this over 100 years ago, and he absolutely nailed it. In a world just flooded with data and polls and studies, understanding how this information gets made isn't just for academics. It's a crucial skill for being an informed citizen.
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it seems totally impossible to ask every single person, but the answer is surprisingly simple. You don't have to. You just have to understand how a small piece can be a perfect reflection of the whole thing.
Okay, so to solve this impossible question, we first need to get a couple of key terms straight. And it all starts by defining exactly who or what we're talking about.
First up is the population. Now, in statistics, this doesn't just mean people. It's the entire group you want to study. It could be all the students at a university, or every high school in America, or heck, even every car built last year. It is the whole shebang.
Right. So, since we can't possibly study that entire population, we look at a smaller slice of it. That small group that we actually observe is called the sample. Think of it as our little window into that much bigger group.
So, let's dig into how these two ideas connect. Because really, this relationship between the whole and the part, it's the foundation for this entire process.
This makes it crystal clear, right? If your population is the entire student body of a college, your sample might just be 500 of those students. If your population is all high school students in America, maybe your sample is just the students at one specific school. One's the whole, the other is the part. Simple as that.
And here's the real magic, the whole point of the exercise. We don't just study the sample to learn about that one little group. The goal is to take what we find and then generalize it, to make a really good, educated guess about the entire population it came from.
But how do you actually choose that sample? It's not as simple as just grabbing a few people. It turns out there are two fundamentally different ways you can go about it, two completely separate paths you can take.
And you can see the massive difference right here. On one side, you've got probability sampling. The key word is chance. Every single member of that population has a known shot at being picked, all thanks to pure randomness. This is the scientific gold standard. Then you have non-probability sampling. Here, it's not about chance. It's all based on a researcher's judgment, or just what's convenient. All right, let's take a quick look down each of these two paths and see how a common method from each one actually works in the real world.
The absolute gold standard of that scientific path is something called simple random sampling. The name kind of says it all, right? It's simple and it's totally random. The whole idea here is to get human bias completely out of the picture.
So the process is super deliberate. First, you define your group. Then, and this can be the really hard part, you list every single member. And finally, you let pure chance, like a computer spitting out random numbers, pick your sample. This way, the researcher's personal opinions have zero influence on who gets chosen.
Okay, now let's jump over to the other path. Probably the most common method you'll see here is exactly what it sounds like, convenience sampling. It's often used because, well, it's easy and it's cheap.
This is when researchers just use whoever is available. Polling students in their own classroom, asking for volunteers online, or just interviewing people they run into on the street. But, and this is a huge but, there's a critical warning. Because there's no randomness, you can't legitimately generalize what you find to a larger population. It's seen as the weakest method, but sometimes it's the only one that's practical.
So what happens when you get this wrong? What are the actual stakes if a sample isn't chosen the right way? Well, lucky for us, history has given us a truly spectacular example.
2.5 million. I mean, that is a massive number. You would think a sample that big would have to be accurate, right? Well,
So let's go back to 1936. A huge magazine called the Literary Digest ran one of the biggest polls ever. They got responses from 2.5 million people, and based on that, they confidently predicted that President Franklin D. Roosevelt was going to lose the election.
well, not only did Roosevelt not lose, he won in one of the biggest landslide victories in American history. The poll wasn't just a little bit off, it was an absolute colossal failure. So what on earth happened? The problem wasn't the size, it was the bias. See, first, they got their names from car registrations and phone books. But in 1936, during the Great Depression, people who owned cars and phones tended to be wealthier than the average American. So the sample was skewed from the very beginning.
And second, only some of those people actually mailed the poll back. So the sample was also biased towards people who felt really strongly about the election.
This amazing story from history gives us an incredibly powerful tool for our own thinking, especially when we're trying to make sense of all the information thrown at us today.
And if you take away one thing from all this, let it be this. The method you use matters so much more than the number of people you ask. A small, carefully, randomly selected sample is always going to be better than a massive, biased one.
Because at the end of the day, the whole goal of a sample is to be a perfect miniature version of the entire population. Size feels impressive, sure, but representativeness, that is everything. Without it, even a giant sample is totally worthless.
So from now on, when you see a headline about a new poll, what's the first question that should pop into your head? It shouldn't be, how many people did they ask? It should be, how did they choose the people they asked? That one simple question is the key to becoming a much, much smarter consumer of information.